Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. The joys of being able to hold these meetings virtually is that so many of you can listen in. So thank you very much for joining us for this extremely interesting and important discussion on how we transition to net zero, especially looking at the financial services sector. So this discussion broadly looks at how Spain and the UK can work closely to deliver the COP26 private finance hub strategy, and also wider discussions on preparation for COP26 and what those hope to see afterwards. I'm very pleased to welcome everybody to this session. If you have questions, please do type them in the function that you see in the Slido function next to the screen. We are pleased to have the keynote addresses from Gonzalo Munoz, the high-level climate action champion, then followed by Emma Howard-Boyd, interim chair at Green Finance Institute. And we have William Russell, Lord Mayor of the City of London. Following this, we have the panel discussion with Danai Karakapoulou, who is the Senior Policy Fellow at Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and Environment at the London School of Economics. She is also head of chairing the OMFIF Sustainable Policy Institute. And I want to say a special thanks to the British Embassy in Madrid, who have been working tirelessly with OMFIF throughout this process, and also the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the United Kingdom. So thank you to both. We have the representation of also the president of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the UK later in the proceedings, and Hugh Elliott, the British ambassador to Spain and Andorra, will be closing proceedings. So you will see me later also moderating the second session. So thank you all. And without further ado, I am pleased to hand over to Gonzalo Munoz to make the opening statements. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today, and to the British Embassy in Madrid for this discussion. We are less than 50 days out from COP26. In the year since the summit was meant to be held in 2020, the sense of urgency behind the need for rapid action on climate change has only grown. Only a few weeks ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, released their new assessment on climate science in what the UN Secretary General called a code red for humanity. There are three key messages and findings in the report. First one, human-induced climate change is indisputable. Second, climate change is affecting every region on our planet. Third, strong, rapid reductions in greenhouse gas emissions are needed to curb global warming. The warning signs are already apparent: lethal storms, heat waves, and floods that we've seen in recent weeks and months. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has warned, this report is a code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening and the evidence is irrefutable. Greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel burning and deforestation are choking our planet and putting billions of people at immediate risk. He called for an end to new coal plants and to new fossil fuel exploration and development, and for governments, investors, and businesses to pour all their efforts into a low-carbon future. This report, he said, must sound a death knell for coal and fossil fuels before they destroy our planet. So what we need to achieve at COP26? First thing is to secure global net zero by mid-century at the very latest and keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. Countries are being asked to come forward with ambitious 2030 emissions reduction targets. Second, we need, of course, to adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. Third, we need to mobilize finance. The developed countries must deliver on their promise to raise at least $100 billion in climate finance per year. And fourth, of course, finalize the Paris rulebook, the rules for implementing the Paris Agreement. So all eyes are now at COP26, and the world wants Glasgow and needs Glasgow to be a success. The urgency is absolutely clear, the political and public support stronger, the non-state actors' momentum greater than ever. The UK COP presidency has been really clear that non-state actors' action, including finance, won't be a sideshow but central to the agenda at Glasgow. The way the summit is organized over the fortnight deliberately places a focus beyond the negotiations on the real economy transformation needed to keep 1.5 alive and achieve net zero. Each day will place a spotlight on evidencing the transformation underway and the breakthrough actions we need. As you all know, after the World Leaders Summit on the first 2 days, the focus turns immediately to finance, reflecting its pivotal role in the transition and shaping the real economy. The central role of finance in the summit is a reflection of how the sector has moved to the center of the agenda on climate, which is a testament to Mark's leadership and the work of the private finance hub, focusing minds around the risk returns reporting framework. So how can you all get involved in COP26? Every company, bank, insurer, and investor will need to adjust their business model, develop credible plan for the transition to a low carbon and climate resilient future, and then implement those plans. We need the whole of the financial system on board. In that sense, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, that was launched in April 21 by myself and my dear friend Nigel Topping, the Climate Action Champions, with, of course, Mark Carney, UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, and the UK Prime Minister Finance Advisor for COP26, and the COP26 Private Finance Hub in partnership with the UNFCCC Climate Action Champions and the COP26 Presidency. Bringing together existing and new net zero finance initiatives in one sector-wide coalition, GFAN provides a forum for strategic coordination among the leadership of finance institutions to accelerate the transition to a net zero economy. GFANZ is a global coalition of leading financial institutions committed to accelerating the decarbonization of the economy. Members currently include more than 250 financial firms responsible for assets in excess to $88 trillion. The coalition is focused on broadening, deepening, and raising net zero ambitions across the financial system all around the world, allowing firms to demonstrate their collective commitments to supporting companies and countries to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. I strongly encourage financial firms to demonstrate their commitments to achieving global net zero goals by joining the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. To do this, you need to join a Race to Zero finance initiative and commit to net zero actions aligned with science. We have Race to Zero finance initiatives for asset owners, for asset managers, for insurance underwriters, and banks. The Race to Zero has robust criteria that all initiatives must meet, grouped under what we call the 4 Ps: pledge, plan, proceed, and publish. So in that sense, what success looks like and where innovation is needed towards COP26 and towards a net zero resilient world. It is increasingly clear where stakeholders are looking to judge success. On one side, near-term commitments with a focus on what's needed by 2030 for businesses and non-state actors. This means halving emissions in the next 9 years. It's not only about what you will be achieving by mid-century, it's what would you be achieving in this critical decade. Also, succeeding in achieving more of the breakthrough actions needed in every sector on the path to net zero, with evidence of near-term action from critical numbers of real economy actors. Also, mobilizing the capital needed, not just the $100 billion that are promised by governments, but the trillions that are needed to transform emerging as well as advanced economies. Also, fossil fuel phase out, with a focus on whether the world is serious about consigning coal to history. And stakeholders are looking for the evidence that finance is supporting this. Then the rules and the architecture in place to deliver the actions needed from states and non-state actors. And finally, not just focusing on mitigation and reducing emissions, but ensuring there is a proper plan in place to build climate resilience for 4 billion of the most vulnerable people in the world. In the UK, in Spain, and in Latin America, we have strong cultures of innovation and an increasing interest in green finance. The net zero transition offers a significant opportunity to build back better with finance players critical to the innovation that is needed. In Latin America, we are seeing countries like my country, Chile, emitting green bonds with great success. Asset managers like Linsor Capital implementing ESG and the 1.5 trajectory in all their portfolio. And banks like Bancolombia developing products for the clients related to best practices like Certified B Corporation or Race to Zero. Let me close by saying that the moment is now. Science has spoken loud, the natural evidence is hitting harder, the citizens of the world are concerned, the technology is ready, and the money is starting to flow in the right direction. The risk of inaction is unacceptable. The size of the opportunity is immense, and we have a moral duty to act. Join Race to Zero today.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to now welcome Emma Howard-Boyd to make her remarks.
Hello, everyone, and always great to share a platform with Gonzalo. In planning for future events, it's useful to look at what's happened in the past. With COP26 this year, it might be helpful to think about COP21 in Paris. The Paris Agreement remains the most impressive international agreement to deal with the climate emergency to date. Agreement and action take hard work and organisation, even among like-minded nations. When I was at COP21 in December 2015, when the Paris Agreement was being signed, I was attending as part of a financial delegation to talk about the opportunities brought by the transition to a low-carbon economy. At that point, I was also on the board of the Environment Agency, and midway through the 2 weeks of COP, I remember being briefed by colleagues about some of the worst flooding England has ever seen. On December the 5th, 2015, a record 341.4 millimetres of rain fell in 24 hours at Honister Pass in the Lake District. The flooding that followed did not let up until February 2016. The connection between the optimism of the COP conferences and what we all know climate change will bring, even for developed nations, is vital to successfully dealing with climate change. Spain and the UK share many opportunities and challenges in the low carbon transition. In the UK, the Climate Change Committee monitors the actions taken by the UK government to tackle and adapt to climate change. In its latest report this year, it noted the government's recent climate commitments and net zero target, for which it deserves credit. But it is less flattering when it looks at the short-term action that sets us on the path towards delivery. Spain has ambitious recovery and resilience plans for renewables, particularly solar. Spain has earmarked 7 billion euros for building renovation in its plan and will spend that by 2023. But 45 billion euros is required in the next decade to decarbonise. Both countries still have much to do, and difficult choices lie ahead. In both countries and elsewhere around the world, we know that public finance can help bring in private capital. By acting as a credit enhancer, taking first losses, or ensuring a default fund, public funding can attract the required multiples of private capital. And this needs to happen in the EU building renovation market, which has the largest climate investment gap of any sector, 275 billion euros per year to 2030. The 750 billion euros of next generation EU funding has to be put to use in public-private partnerships that can use both policy and financial innovation to sustain the renovation wave past 2030 and beyond. There is no point in building an energy efficient house that could be washed away in a flood. Buildings need to be ready for climate shocks too. The UK's Green Finance Institute, which I also chair, set up the Coalition for the Energy Efficiency of Buildings in 2019 to develop the market for financing a net zero carbon and climate resilient built environment in the UK. Today, the CEIB has over 300 members and accounts for 70% of the UK mortgage market. It is recognised as the leading authority for financing energy efficient buildings in the UK by the market and government, and we are expanding this model into Europe. The Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment is also making a global impact by pricing climate risks, particularly for infrastructure, and including them in upfront financial decision-making. The CCR's aim is to incentivise a shift towards greater resilience. Members of the coalition now have over $16 trillion in assets. The world increasingly recognises the urgency for action and the opportunities that are there in the financial transition. I hope that Spain and the UK can embrace these opportunities together at COP26 and beyond, for the good of our economies, for the good of our people, and for the good of the planet. Thank you very much. Mil gracias.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation from the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum and the Spanish Chamber of Commerce to speak on financial services and transitioning to net zero. This transition is a priority for all of us as we head down what I like to call the green brick road to COP26, the first climate conference where finance is recognized as a key theme. The IPCC report published last month underlined the urgency of the threat and the scale of the challenge from climate change. A challenge which requires us to harness the scale and expertise of the global financial industry. Because making the transition to net zero will require global investment of between $1 and $2 trillion every year. In other words, an amount similar to Spain's GDP. The report showed just how vital it is that at COP26 we don't just make progress, but that this is a real turning point for the world. Sustainable finance is a crucial tool in the race to meet climate targets and reach net zero. A transition in which financial services will be absolutely vital, and a transition where the UK and Spain will lead the way. Fortunately, we have a strong partnership in financial services to build on. The Spanish presence here in the City of London, and indeed on high streets across the UK, is very strong. Spanish banks have the largest presence of all foreign banks in the UK, larger than Germany or the USA. Santander alone employs 20,000 people in the UK, the largest foreign bank in the city. Sabadell, the owner of TSB, employs a further 7,000 people. And I know that the Spanish government plans to launch its inaugural green bond this month, something we have also seen here in the UK. All those who work here in the City of London should be assured that we are backing up our words with actions. In 2007, the City of London Corporation became the first governing body in the UK to produce a dedicated climate change adaptation strategy. And last year, we launched our climate action strategy To our knowledge, we are the first financial centre in the world to do this. This strategy will see us achieve net zero across the city by 2040, 10 years ahead of UK government goals. We also helped set up the Green Finance Institute to support sustainable finance solutions around the world. Because we know the financial solutions to climate change have to be global. So the City of London has been working to support the private finance agenda for COP, led by Mark Carney. I congratulate those Spanish banks, such as Santander, BBVA, the Caixa y Ibercaja, and Arm Bank, who have committed to the Net Zero Banking Initiative. We are now just over 6 weeks away from COP26, which must be a pivotal moment for our planet and a pivotal moment for finance. So to build on the Green Horizon Summit, which the City of London held last year, we have launched our plans for GHS at COP26. Our objectives are to mobilise private capital in the transition to net zero and to provide as a platform for financial and professional services at COP26. Our agenda is designed to tackle 4 big questions. The first, how can we finance the transition? Second, how can we build a global playbook? Third, how can we price carbon and nature? And fourth, how can we meet and beat the $100 billion promise made at COP16? Now, to answer these questions, we are bringing together sustainable finance stakeholders across borders and across sectors, with content that is global, relevant, and challenging. This will be a 6-day hybrid event with a physical hub in Glasgow, linked to the City of London and financial centres around the world, reaching a global audience. I hope you will be able to join us at this event, and I hope you will work with us to make sure we keep the momentum going beyond COP26, sharing knowledge and expertise between financial institutions in the UK and Spain, and indeed around the world, will be vital to getting us through the climate crisis and meeting the challenge successfully. I wish you all a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're very pleased to start the first session with Danai. So over to you, Danai.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, for setting the scene across UK and Spain. As you said, very big efforts in the financial sector. It's my pleasure now to welcome the first panel to talk about efforts in the UK and Spain. So welcoming to the stage Tony Balabriga, who is the global head of responsible business at BBVA. Welcome, Tony. We also have Jose Maria Roldan, chairman of the Spanish Banking Association. Very good to see you again. Ángel Martínez Aldama, president of Inverco. Very good to see you. And we also have James Houghton, program director at the Green Finance Institute. Thank you very much for joining. Un placer to see you all again. I recall meeting in person last time, probably at the COP in Madrid, just before the pandemic hit. But let's start by talking about Spain and the UK and what we've seen so far. So maybe starting with you, Tony, to talk to us about Spain and what, in your view, have been some of the most impactful policies that we've seen since Spain hosted their last COP in terms of climate risk management in the financial sector and managing climate-related financial risks. And what do you think needs to be done more to accelerate this transition as we look ahead to Glasgow?
Well, congratulations for this session, and thank you for the invitation. Great pleasure to be here. I think that in Spain we have done a lot in the last years. I think we have already a quite robust policy framework to help us to align society and the economy as a whole to net zero. Obviously, we have some dependencies from Europe, but in Europe, European Union has set climate targets. We have from Europe also the newer strategy in sustainable finance, which is built on the action plan that was approved on the 2018 with great achievements. And also we have the Next Generation EU as a huge opportunity, to mobilize finance to sustainability. So what is coming from Europe is very well aligned, and also what we have at the national level is very, very relevant. We have approved our Climate Act, we have a just transition strategy, we have a national plan on energy and climate for 2030, and all of them are aligned to net zero goals. So I think that in Spain, we could say that in general, we have, as I said, a robust policy framework to net zero. But having said that, obviously, we also see opportunities, to what's next, in my opinion, well, first, I think that we need to work a little bit more on incentives for individuals and companies to promote behavioral change, also to avoid dysfunctions, to avoid perverse signals like now that we have with energy price. Also, in this sense, we need, secondly, to have right mechanisms in the financial sector to incentivize financial flows and alignment to net zero. I have to confess that for the moment, when we see sustainable finance, all are costs for green finance. We need data, we need the standards, we need disclosure, we need supervision. It's a little bit overwhelming for banks, and market price differences between green and non-green are still low. So where is the carrot? So I think something we need to work on that. Third, I think we need to support investment in key sectors and activities, working more on public partnerships in sectors difficult to abate. And finally, we will ask also a neutral policy, fiscal policy, and more coordination at the global level, ambition and more certainty, especially on carbon price regulation. These are a few requests that we have on the table now. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. A very complete list of what the financial sector needs. But as you said, progress is being made on a lot of these fronts, and we will be talking later also about the disclosures, the taxonomies, the data questions as well that you raised. And of course, we can go into also the EU's Fit for 55 plan and the kind of regulation that we're seeing coming through from the EU. But let me turn to you now, James, for the UK. And same question to you. What do you think are the most impactful policies that have been put in place? The UK has also put in place very ambitious targets. And at the Green Finance Institute, you work very closely with the finance community and the City of London. We heard from the Lord Mayor about the initiatives there and from Emma Howard-Boyd as well. But what do you think still needs to be done, and what have been the most successful things we've seen so far? Thank you.
Thanks, Donna, and thank you very much for the introduction and the invite to today. I think that keeping it probably brief, I think what needs to be done is there needs to be more of a collaborative conversation. I think too often policy is misaligned with the market risks that private finance are trying to tackle. I think there's a misalignment, there's a misunderstanding, and sometimes there's a mispricing of that risk. And so it's important that government and policymakers are in the room with private finance and with the entire supply chain, making some of the decisions about how policy is implemented in the short term and the long term. I think the UK government absolutely have fantastic ambition. I think we're on our way to exceeding our third carbon budget for the end of next year. I think there's risks though regarding budgets 4, 5, and 6. I think what we really need to see now is some collaborative policy moves that will unlock what is clearly the private capital that's waiting in the wings.
Great, thank you very much, James. And let me turn to you now, Jose Maria, with a similar question, but slightly different in terms of what are the biggest lessons that you think you have learned in Spain in terms of the actions to transition, to support the green transition and to manage climate-related financial risks. We heard from the Lord Mayor all the good things that Spanish banks have been doing. What do you think are the lessons that have been learned in terms of the practices that have been employed and what can be done differently going forward?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would highlight in terms of what is very relevant is that, post-COVID, we have seen an international alignment on the fight against climate change that we have not seen before. So in COP25, we made, a move forward, Spain and the Spanish banks, but it's extremely important that this was not an isolated movement by us, but, that everybody was making the same progress at the same pace. I'm talking about the U-turn of US policies in this respect with the new presidency, but also if you think about, the post-Brexit world, the almost perfect alignment between the UK and the EU on this very important issue is of extreme importance. So I think that we should not underestimate the importance of this international alignment. I would also mention China. China being, a big player is also showing, the willingness to make progress in that respect. That is the first thing I would highlight. The second one is that, for us, the fact that the EU recovery plan, the next generation EU, is offering us the possibility of building back better exactly on the areas where we saw the need to make progress. We're talking about green and we are talking about digital, and both of them are very closely united. Without technology, we will not be able to deliver what we need to deliver in terms of climate change. That has also been very important at the European level. We have also this framework, and for Spain, given the type of companies that we have, the challenge of helping SMEs is of the extreme relevance and of great importance. Spain is an SME-based country, and we have to think, especially the banks, because they are our clients. Naturally, they are our clients. We need to think how we can help them, in making progress. And just to add some spice to my initial intervention, so that not everything is rosy, I would mention that on the ideas that we are putting forward, I think that we need to abandon advocacy and inject greater certainty around the process. The fight against climate change has become mainstream. We don't need to work anymore on raising awareness. I think that anybody that has spent the summer in Spain with extreme events that we have just seen and does not need to be convinced on the importance of the fight against climate change. This really has become mainstream, not just in terms of political parties, of financial institutions, also in terms of consumers, of citizens, of clients. So what I think that we are lacking is a little bit more of technical guidance and of planning going forward. If you allow me to use an expression I'm using, we need, more plumbers of climate change and less apostles of climate change. So I think that we need to give this certainty. And why this is relevant? Yes, because we need capital and we need investment. But we economists know that without clear rules, without certainty, there will be no capital deployment and no investment deployment. So clear rules are a necessary, not sufficient, but a necessary conditions for capital and investments to take place, for capital to be available and for investment to take place. That would be my plea. We need to give a little bit more of certainty to the whole process.
Thank you, Jose Maria. Yes, very important that we are moving, as you said, from the why to the how. It's no longer about the motivations. This is clear for everyone. You mentioned the summer in Spain. I remember the winter in Spain as well. I spent winter in Spain. We had Filomena and all these very extreme weather events throughout Southern Europe. So, of course, something that's becoming very obvious. But as you said, also the combination of digital and sustainable as big items of the agenda and how they can reinforce each other going forward. Ángel, also your perspective on this in terms of what are some of the lessons that you've learned from your perspective in the rules that have been put in place for the green transition and what we still need to see in terms of incentives, both for avoiding damaging activities towards climate, but also supporting the green recovery and seeing that also as a growth story?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the British Embassy in Madrid, the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the United Kingdom, of course, OMFIF, for organizing this seminar that, as you have mentioned, is in between COP25 and COP26. And a lot of things that has been done, my colleagues have happened during these nearly 12 months. This is an opportunity that we have in front of us. We have not to lose the momentum because, of course, as has been said, there is a mentalization that this climate change has to be dealt, and the necessity for the financial sector, of course, banks, insurance companies, and asset managers is crucial. There is an estimation from the European Commission that 300 billion a year should be invested, and clearly the public finances are under pressure, and they cannot cope and finance all this huge amount in order to transform our economy. So this is an opportunity that the financial institutions have to collaborate with the aims, of course, shared by not only politicians, but all the population. And there are some challenges ahead, of course. As we mentioned, clearly there has been movements in the US and China, but clearly there is not a huge commitment. As Europe has moving forward with clear calendars and with clear objectives. I think one of the COP26 objectives should be clearly to push on this region, China, US, and perhaps India, that nowadays with Europe are the more consumers in terms of pollution, and should be necessarily to establish for them and that they should establish these clear calendars. And some proposals, of course, we need the rules are there, and we hope that should not be so complicated, should not change dramatically. We need clear rules, perhaps fewer ones, but more clear ones. And of course, financial education campaign is necessary. You have mentioned what happened in summer in Spain, but also we are seeing how the CO2 market is growing up prices. And clearly this should be paid or borne by the consumers. So our colleagues, our compatriots, and clearly if we don't explain what are the damage if we don't act, of course should not be understood that we have to pay a price, but the price should be higher if we don't act. But clearly this transition process could have a price, a cost, and that should be important from the public organizations to share and to insist and clearly give a good objectives and good clear messages about the necessity to act and to spend huge amount of money with our budgets. And well, perhaps we can have later on to comment on public private collaboration, and there has been some examples in Spain and in Europe that we can continue speaking on.
Yes, thank you, Uncle. In fact, let's move on to that now, and perhaps let's start with you, Tony, on how do you see the right mix between public-private collaboration? What do you see the role of the state to be there? You mentioned before that you're not seeing enough carrot in terms of what the banks need to do, that the differentials between acting green and not acting green are not big enough to justify making all this effort. At the same time, a lot of banks are realizing that this is in their very own economic interest in terms of managing the climate risks, and the TCFD reporting is also beginning to become mainstream, even though it's still voluntary largely. But tell us a little bit about how do you see the balance there?
No, climate change is a new reality, especially for the financial sector, no? And it's something that is here. So as James commented, partnerships, collaboration is critical. I think that the things are changing. In the recent years, we have seen a lot of collective work. We need to do more, no? But on financial regulation, for instance, we see regulators working closely with the private sector when defining standards of taxonomies. Also working closely with us in terms of disclosure, corporate disclosure. TCFD would be a good example, but also related to corporate disclosure in general. But even in supervision, we see clearly, at least from the European authorities, a clear that we engage with them, obviously, often. We see a way to collaborate to see how we can upfront this new reality. As Jose Maria says, we need more planning, we need more guidance, but there is a very productive dialogue. So I think that on financial regulation, there is a partnership there, or there is a collaboration that is becoming more critical. No? But also on finance mobilization, this is another area where we should work more, and also finally on data, no? To consider that data in certain cases is coming good, that we could use, we could try to see how we can leverage on all the capabilities that we have and the public institutions they have in order to manage better climate risk, especially, you know. So I think that's a good examples where we have more partnerships. And I think in Spain we have very good experiences. I think a good partnership is I probably Jose Maria would like to cover it, or maybe Angel, but FinRest, which is the Financial Center for Responsible Sustainable Finance here in Spain, is a great example of partnership. So I think that this is absolutely critical in this new era.
Thank you. And maybe just to follow up with you a little bit on that and on the kind of managing climate risk from banks, because and you mentioned the data, and of course you and I have had discussions about this as well, and we will be publishing a report on that as well. But the question is also on some banks have raised the concern that if the real economy is not transitioning as much as we want to do climate risk management and measuring and following the disclosure recommendations of the TCFD, we are at the end of the day mirroring a diversified economy, which needs to transition itself in the real economy level. How do you see that, and how do you see the actions that banks can take when examining their portfolios and assessing transition plans of companies that they are lending to?
Well, this is very challenging because we need to have information from our clients to make the right assessment. So we are going to succeed unless our clients succeed in this net zero transition. We are here to help them on advisory, on financial solutions, but obviously data is absolutely critical. So it is very important to have the right sequencing between the regulation and disclosure and risk assessment in order to have everything on the right time, no? And that's the one of the main requests that we have. In our opinion, we think that there is room to collaborate more with the public authorities in general to see which kind of data we may have, we can share, and try not to reinvent sometimes the wheel, no? Because in terms of, for instance, energy efficiency, there is some initiatives in Spain. I know that the Green Finance Institute has been also working in UK on the topic. So I think this type of partnerships is the ones that we think that are more promising, no?
No, thank you. That's very important. And in fact, on the energy efficiency question, I'm also on the advisory council for the Energy Efficiency Mortgages Initiative in Europe, which has banks from across Europe participating in these pilot schemes. And the data is a big challenge that we're facing there, because in some countries you have the GDPR regulations, which means that the banks cannot really have access to the energy efficiency data because they're considered to be linked to individual data. It can become very complicated. And again, I think that's where the technology and the sustainability agendas need to come closer together. But let me turn over to you now, Jose Maria, and Tony already kind of gave you a hint to talk about the initiative that you have in Spain in terms of the Center for Sustainable and Responsible Investment, but also talk to us more broadly about how do you see the role of the public and private partnerships? How far do you think the state can go in terms of de-risking some of these investments or supporting green capital versus also managing the risk on the financial stability level?
Absolutely. I think that the public-private partnerships are essential if we are going to be successful in the fight against climate change. So it's not a question whether we need them, it's a question that how we do it. I would also mention, the private sector partnership, FinRes, which Tony was referring to. It's the investment and firms and investment products, Angel, the banks and the insurance companies in Spain, working together to raise, awareness. Also to raise awareness, not so much on the need to fight against climate change, on the things we need to do to be effective in the fight against climate change. I would say that what I perceive a little bit as problematic, if you allow me to say that way, is that banks and the financial system more broadly are going to be a key element in this strategy. Most probably, we are going to be the lead bird of the flock of fight against climate change. But banks and the financial system, and Tony was referring to that, and you were referring to that, being an important partner cannot be the sole lever, the only game in town. We need help, in particular from authorities, in terms of greater clarity on best practices, on data requirements, on supervisory expectation. And I think that public authorities need to go a little bit outside the comfort zone. The comfort zone for them is we set the rules, you do as we told you. I think that this is complicated in this respect. We need to learn from each other. They need to listen to what we need to say in terms of the problems that we are finding, and to be able also to change if what they are proposing does not make sense in terms of being effective. Here we have, kind of two risks. The risk of greenwashing, we all know it, it's self-evident. But on the other hand, we also have the risk of not having the right incentives in place. If we end up penalizing the good players, we destroy the incentive system, and without a good incentive system, we are not going to be able to be successful in terms of transition to a greener economy. So I would highlight the authorities, I would request the authorities that we need greater clarity to ensure that this is a fair process. It's not easy. Let's not fool ourselves, because you have the starting point of each player, in particular banks or insurance company or investment firms, and you have the progress they're making in terms of where they start. You have to measure the starting point, and you have also to measure the speed, the progress that is being made. By far, it's not easy. But on the side of regulators, I think that we know what they don't like. We are not so sure what they like. And I think that in that respect, we need to work with them more closely so that really best practices emerge and we can apply, all of us. Because if this does not happen, we are not going to be able to avoid the second risk that I was mentioning, that is wrong incentives being in place, good players being penalized. I think that is very dangerous for the whole process.
And how would you rate the communication between the banks and the regulators? Because you sit in the middle of that as well. You engage with both sides. Do you think it's something that has improved over time? I mean, because when you look at it for the economy as a whole, I think the financial sector does stand out as an area where regulators and the industry have very close communication ties when you compare it, for example, to some sectors in the real economy, where I'm hearing from, I don't know, logistics companies who say, we want to improve the regulation so that we can choose the green option, but we don't know who to talk to in government. We don't have those channels of communication in the same way. Whereas with banks, I think it's a lot more established in terms of regulation, because you've had that following the financial crisis as well. You have the kind of infrastructure to ensure that channels are very open.
Yeah, I would say that Ángel Estrada, who is my successor at the Bank of Spain in terms of position, is now the regulator. But I think that the regulators are better with the stick than with the carrots. We like sticks a lot. We have a problem with carrots. We find it difficult to find the adequate carrots. I would say that they realize that this is a very complex, regulators and supervisors, they realize this is a very complex area. I think that sometimes in public, they are, very, very eager to tell the world that they don't like what they are seeing. And I think that they need to make the next step. Tell us what you like. Tell us what are the best practices. I'm thinking on the, EU stress test that was in place. It's very clear the message that we receive from relevant people, Frank Elderson, is that they don't like what they are seeing coming from the banks, but at the same time, they also recognize that our best practices, they are finding in each and every area. Well, I mean, the sooner we know about this, the better for all of us, because we will be able to apply the best practices. So I think that regulators, they need to work better with the carrots area. I think that the stick area is fine. They don't need to develop anything there.
Thank you, Jose Maria. I see Tony nodding there approvingly, but also you mentioned Ángel Estrada, and of course he's speaking on the next panel, and I can see he's logged on and listening to us right now, so I'm sure he'll have the chance to reply to you in the next panel in his intervention. But James, let's come back to the UK because we've heard about the initiatives in Spain in terms of public-private partnerships and also the engagement between the banks and the regulators. How does that look on your side? It was mentioned also the energy efficiency initiatives that you have. How have you seen that interaction in your experience?
I think the interaction is actually really improving. I think from our perspective, the public-private partnerships are totally key. I think in GFI speak, we call it coalitions. And I think in European, that would be technical assistance, as we've talked about. I think, we have coalitions around buildings, we have coalitions around nature, and one around road transport. And that's really bringing together public-private partnerships to unlock and work out what the barriers are to see if we can unlock that capital. I think for me, what we'd like to see more of, and I think the danger is there's plenty of money around, there's plenty of public funding. It's just where that public funding goes. And I think the problem sometimes can be, to send your Roldan's point about plumbers, that money goes to CapEx and it goes to very attractive headline making projects. And what we need actually is a bit of OpEx. We need people on the ground solving the problems. What's the actual detail that's going to overcome the barriers to investment in building renovation, the split incentives, the issues between landlords and tenants, those sorts of things. We need to actually get people on the ground sorting that out. And so for us, we're having really good conversations. The building coalition that we've got in the UK has 360 members, and we have a number of different demonstration projects we're rolling out at the moment. But we just need to continue to see that happening in the UK and in Europe, particularly at the moment in Europe, where the opportunity is now with the next gen funding over the next 5 years, making sure that the grant-based CapEx headline inducing projects are not prioritized over the long-term policy movers that will bring in the private capital that we've talked about today, which is needed to fill that gap. So, and I think if you look at the private finance hub strategy, if you look at the fact there's reporting and risk management there, and mobilization, I think, is the fourth one. Mobilization absolutely has to happen with public and private. We need, what are the shovel-ready projects that we can execute on? And the only way we're going to get that is through those partnerships.
Thank you. And we have a question from the audience, and maybe James, you can take that, about following also from what Jose Maria was talking about incentives, in terms of what are the specific incentives that you think should be in place that we don't have at the moment? What would you see as a good incentive system, and how can the public sector set these incentives?
Well, quite topical. How about, so in the UK, when you buy a property, you pay stamp duty on that property. It's quite a stamp duty land tax. I think a great incentive in the building market would be to say, if you buy a property that is under a certain energy efficiency level, and you then renovate it to a certain energy efficiency level, the stamp duty decreases. And it's not necessary to say it will decrease enough to pay for the full renovation, but it'll get home buyers thinking about, okay, I'm buying a property, I'm tying myself into this property, and therefore the energy liability that property represents. What do I need to do about that? Is there anything I can do? And that nudge can actually be revenue neutral to the Treasury, the way it's been designed, and something that we support, as well as I know mortgage lenders across the UK support. So it's triggers like that, more carrots rather than sticks, that I think can absolutely work to, and also as a long-term incentive to, in one particular sector that I referenced there, the building sector.
Thank you, great. Ángel, over to you, and maybe you also want to suggest some of these more practical incentives, but I also wanted to ask you a little bit about what are the steps that can be taken to develop the COP26 private finance hub strategy, and what work you have done in that area.
Well, in fact, the role of the public and private partnership in terms that the COP26 should be aware This is the FRAG, for example, is an example of how the industry is working together with the regulators. The European Financial Reporting Advisory Group now has been requested by the European Commission to deliver the first draft sustainability reporting standard by June 2022. So this is a way how we can work together. There are a lot of challenges ahead. One of them has been mentioned before, the cost of data. This is a very important issue, and how the information, not only for clients when we're speaking about banks, but in terms of issuers, when we're speaking about asset managers. The asset managers have a duty to inform in their reporting, in their reports, but they have not the data available. And if they should be the case, the cost from the consultants is higher and higher. So this is now a way how this single access point from the European Commission initiative would be an important milestone in order to overcome this problem. But unfortunately, the new directive or the new proposal, corporate sustainability reporting directive, should not be put in place until 2023. So in between, there is a gap that could be misunderstood by the investors, because on one side you have not a clear rules, the 1, 2, even level 3 in terms of regulation, but at the same time you have some duties as asset manager or as a bank, but in my case, asset manager. So this is a way that during the debates in the COP26 could be dealt, and this is an appropriate calendar with clear objectives, with the taxonomy quite clear. We know that we are learning all together every day, so this is a lot of pressure over the regulators, over the supervisors, but at the same time over the private institutions, because the outcomes we have to deliver to our clients, to our compatriots, a clear rules, a clear information, and the way that these outcomes should be produced depends on how the things should go in terms of clear sequencing, in terms of calendar. So I should like this plea that could be debated during the next COP, and hopefully the rest of the region should be at least half as European region has been in terms of establishing a clear calendar and a clear objectives.
Great, thank you. And we have another interesting question from the audience about the taxonomy, because the EU has, of course, done a lot of work on its own, but the UK is now doing work on the taxonomy, and James, the Green Finance Institute, is very involved in that as well. But maybe Tony, first from you, because you've been involved in the EU's taxonomy and you've been very closely working with that. What do you expect to be some similarities between the EU and the UK taxonomy? What have been some of the issues when, in working with the EU taxonomy, you may have thought that perhaps the UK may take a different approach? Do you have any concerns about maybe some fragmentation there?
No, well, we hope a convergence, between taxonomies globally, not only in UK, but also in other regions and also in emerging countries. We are in favor to develop building blocks that can, each taxonomy should have the possibility to speak to each other, and to help assessment for banks and also for your capital markets investors. Otherwise, will be a great burden and great cost. This asymmetry will create, not the right certainty that we need, as Jose Maria said, about how to mobilize sustainable finance. So this is absolutely critical to have at least building blocks. We recognize that certain activities, we can be more or less ambitious in different parts of the world. That's normal, but we have to have this common building block. So in this sense, we really appreciate the work of the European Commission, at least to putting this global let's say alignment as one of the four pillars of the new strategy in sustainable finance, this global ambition, to see how we can work together with the International Platform on Sustainable Finance in taxonomies, which is absolutely critical.
Thank you, Tony. And James, would be good to hear from you as well. Where do you see the kind of areas of convergence or potential divergence to be between the UK and EU taxonomies? And we're coming to an end. So after that, I will ask all of you a question about COP26 and what do you expect? So start getting ready for that. But James, over to you.
Well, I'll keep it brief actually tonight, because it's my boss is currently working through the taxonomy group. I think just very briefly, I think we feel that there's certain strengthening of ambition that can be carried out across the taxonomy. The last thing we want is a divergence. We've talked about collaboration. We don't want to diverge, but we're hoping that we can strengthen some pieces of the ambition of that taxonomy. And so that's really the plan at the moment. We're just getting into the weeds of that at the moment. So, but we certainly don't want to diverge.
Great, thank you. So COP26 coming up, 32 working days to go, I think. So what are your expectations and what are your hopes, very quickly? Angel, let's start with you.
Well, I've said before, hopefully it should be, as we have been saying, less words and more actions, clear commitments, and knowing that everybody is learning every day. Please do the right appropriate things moving forward, but without turning around and turning back in terms of criteria, in terms of if nuclear should be in, should be out, the carbon, and so on. The brown activities, I think this is a question that clearly should be potentialized, because and to promote those companies, those sectors that are dirty ones, should be clearly incentivized to be more cleaner. So not just starting from scratch, not just only promoting new energies, but also promoting industries that are dirty and in order to be greener.
Thank you. Very important point. We shouldn't just growing the level, but reallocating within that. I think that's very important. Jose Maria.
Well, I think that, I'm not a fan of government intervention, but I do think that the fight against climate change is a textbook example of the need of government interventions. Markets on their own will not fix the problem. So what we need, in the same vein as I was mentioning in my first intervention, we need clarity on who does what and when, not just on actions needed, but also on the timing of those actions, a roadmap, a clear idea of who does what, who is in charge. And if I may use a controversial quote, and I'm sure that is going to be a controversial quote, I think that we need to apply the old slogan, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. I think that we need to be very clear on that. The second element I would like to mention is that we need to tackle the elephant in the room, how to deal with the specific sectors. And I'm not just thinking on coal, oil, or energy, but also chemical industry, cement industry, air carriers, sea carriers. Here we need even a clearer roadmap if we are going to succeed. And finally, we need international cooperation to continue. This is complicated. Without international cooperation, is mission impossible.
Thank you, Jose Maria. And yes, very important to also have in mind the inequalities that come with climate action and how that can make it politically unacceptable in some cases as well. We've seen that before, so it's important that action is accompanied by other corrective measures. Tony.
Yes, well, I agree with all has been mentioned. I would add two ideas. The first one is that obviously what is clear that we need ambition, as also pointed out by Gonzalo Muñoz. Well, according to the latest Carbon Action Tracker, we have 131 countries covering 73% of global greenhouse emissions that have adopted or considering net zero targets. But we need, as was said, more clarity about the NDCs from China or US, see the exact plans that they're going to have, and also see other countries that are very relevant like India or Mexico. So we need really ambition, especially from certain emerging countries. But the second idea is that we not only need ambition, we need more multilateralism than ever. We cannot do it alone. We cannot do it without emerging countries. So our opinion is that Article 9, the famous 100 billion that we only contribute now 80 billion in 2018, from developed countries to emerging countries, we need to have a robust framework to implement it, this 100 billion or even more. No? So we need specific commitments by country on a yearly basis. We need clarity on how these commitments are going to be funded, specifying the role from private and public institutions, clarity on how funds are going to be allocated between nations, and obviously the right governance. No? So we think that this second point is absolutely critical. Otherwise, we are not going to get ambition from emerging countries without our support. So that's a key message. And finally, I think another idea is that private financial sector, I think that we have done the work. We have a lot in front of us, but thanks to G funds, and in the case of the banks, we have the Net Zero Banking Alliance with 55 banks already. So we are already there to move from risk to opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. And finally, James, the UK is hosting the COP, and you're of course very close to the organizers. What is your expectations and what are your hopes? Are they aligned?
I think, yeah, they're certainly aligned. Yes, for this one time, I would say we haven't got much time left, but they are aligned, and I think they've pretty much been covered. I think you've talked about coal abatement, developing nations, the 40 trillion infrastructure gap that is there across the developing nations, and as Antonio said, it's definitely at least 100 billion a year, and we've missed the start date last year for that, so it's probably more. And you can see some, frankly, if I can say, anger from some developing nations that were missing that. So those things are key, and I think then down to the more granular level, as Sonia Roldan said, we need, what is the roadmap? We need, I think, for me, policymakers to be in the room with some of these coalitions, technical assistance, whatever you might call it. We need the private sector and the public sector to come together and actually have conversations at the same time, and not, we need more carrots, basically. And so that for me would be what I'd like to see.
Great, thank you very much, James, and thank you to everyone. Really great to have you all on the panel and have this conversation. We could be talking a lot more, but I look forward to hopefully seeing some of these suggestions that you've made here today become reality in not too long. It's now a pleasure to hand over to Eduardo Barachina, who is the president of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce, to open the second panel. Over to you, Eduardo.
Thank you very much, Denai, and good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from the City of London here, just 1 minute from the Bank of England. So I'm delighted to be here, and I thank OMFIF and the British Embassy for organizing this extremely interesting panel discussion, and special greetings to Her Excellency, the British Ambassador, and a good friend of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce. It's very clear that the bilateral relationship between our both countries is probably at the best since probably Wellington came to Spain 200 years ago. United Kingdom is a key partner for us. It's been mentioned by the lords of the city, the contribution that the Spanish banks make to the British economy. And that relationship now under this new context can only improve. Unlike agriculture and the energy resources and the industrial sector, financial institutions contribute very little to global greenhouse gas emissions in terms of physical operations. And it's been very clear during the previous panelists and speakers that growing numbers of financial institutions are committing to delivering net zero finance emissions. And we know that they aim to achieve this through applying their capabilities and networks of relationships to support customers in their own transitions towards net zero. Many banks, pension funds, private equity, investors, and insurers have already become carbon neutral in their day-to-day operations. So that's very good. And this has been achieved by improving the energy efficiency of the buildings and data centers, directly investing in renewable energy assets, and procuring, more importantly, renewable energy credits and carbon offsets. However, I just want to share with you 3 or 4 reflections, and I'll be very interested whether someone in the next panel picks up some of them. We know the financial sector, and it's demonstrated today, plays a far-reaching role in funding the global energy transition away from fossil fuels by supplying capital and generating returns for traditional and low-carbon asset classes, while meeting at the same time, this is important, the broader needs of stakeholders, shareholders, and investors. And I think this will pose a challenge and at the same opportunity, how financial institutions will balance this. This takes me to the second point, which is more practical, on whether financial institutions might be concerned about a potential escalating risk of default in the loan books, or poor performance in the investment portfolios. When we're talking about companies, borrowers who might be cut off by all these new, all this brave new wall and all this transition, do we know whether everyone will be able to not to miss the train? Whether I'm thinking of the sectors of transport, I'm thinking of industry, energy. It will be important just to ensure that no company is left behind, and that does not have a negative impact, as I said, on the loan books of financial institutions, or in a different way, that financial institutions are not put off by that risk. So I think that's a key aspect that I think we should all reflect about it. Another reflection is that, and I see this in my day-to-day work with other banks, financial institutions are still struggling with how to quantify and incorporate climate-specific risk in their investment underwritings, including how to balance their risk with meeting thresholds. This is something which is still being discussed, and I think it's worth listening to what other panelists have to say. We know very well banks' financing and investment sector is critical to deliver the sustainable infrastructure projects which are needed for this economic growth. And I'm particularly worried about the traditional transportation, educational and medical facilities, which are extremely expensive and at the same time carbon intensive. How banks will be able to finance all these huge, extremely huge and large projects will have to be addressed. I will finish with a very technical point as well, and this is probably me being a lawyer, but it's also important that we mention the role of derivative instruments when it comes to facilitate this transition to net zero. Derivatives are critical to channel capital towards sustainable investments. It really helps market participants to hedge risk related to environmental, social, and governance, the ESG factors. They facilitate transparency, price discovery, and market efficiency. And we know, because they've been few in the market, a number of derivatives which have incorporated key performance indicators as a way to articulate or calibrate arrangement systems that will encourage companies to meet actually those ESG objectives by giving them incentives in the premium or lower spread and so on. Don't want to go technical because it's not the place, but it's going to be one of those instruments which I think will be key. So from our perspective, and I finish, I reiterate that we at the Chamber of Commerce will remain extremely committed to this debate. Amongst our members and patrons, we have both British and Spanish companies which are working already in the preparation for COP26. Some of them are present here today, others are in the boards. And as ever, we remain very open to help from London with in collaboration with the Spanish and British Embassy and private sector and companies. So thank you very much to everyone, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much, President Baratina. That was very illuminating and a very good segue into this second panel, that we have a fantastic discussion lined up. We are running a little later than we would be hoping, but these things happen. So we'll just be keeping everybody tight into time. So thank you very much. I can see that we already have Alex Mitchie on the line, who is head of Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Joining this panel will also be Marta Garcia, who is responsible banking sector manager for Banco Santander. So very good to see you, Marta. We have Angel Estrada, who is the Director General of Financial Stability, Regulation and Resolution at Banco de España. So very good to see you there. I think we've seen you pop up and listening intently to the first session. So great to see you. And then Simon Thompson, Chief Executive of the Chartered Banker Institute. Simon, it's very good to have you here. I think the first session set up very well. The discussion that covered, actually, Simon and I were talking earlier this morning, and he said that if the discussion doesn't start or have data in it, there's no point in having one on climate. So data is extremely important, as is some of the suggestions for a carrot rather than the stick, and also the discussion on public-private partnerships. This second session, I really want to focus on the net zero and future of green finance. So kind of following on for those discussions, how can we embed the climate discussions into everything we do, and sustainability into every part of the banking and financial sector, rather than it being part of, but it being very much ingrained into. So first of all, I want to go to each participant, each member of the panel, and talking around the main steps being taken to assess the resilience of companies and financial sector to the risks posed by climate change. How can this be globally aligned? There were a couple of questions coming in from the last panel that look to the pressure on business commitments and might not change behavior in company and banks, but what are the key public policies to be implemented? So I think that is also ingrained into this. How do we really achieve the financial sector to be taking steps to ensure that the risks posed by the climate change are mitigated against? So let's start with Alex. Let's start with you first, and then we'll go to Marta, and then we'll go to Angel as well. So Alex.
Thanks, Ellie, and it's great listening to the first panel and the remarks. So I'm Alex Mickey. I'm head of the Glasgow Financial Alliance in the COP26 Private Finance Hub, reporting to Mark Carney, who is the chair of the Glasgow Financial Alliance, and working very closely with Gonzalo, who obviously opened this event, and Nigel Topping, his colleague. So in response to your question, I think there's obviously a regulatory angle, like when central banks, prudential, macroprudential, microprudential authorities clearly have a role and a remit to ensure that financial stability risks are well managed. And we all know, and we've known for 6 years, I'd say, or more, that climate change, going back to the tragedy of the Horizon speech that my boss gave at Lloyd's of London in 2015, is a financial stability risk. And I think central banks and other prudential supervisors and regulators around the world have really upped their game in recent years, and we as the COP26 team have been supporting them in that. You've got the Network for Greening the Financial System, which is obviously supporting global coordination to make sure things like climate stress testing are done in a coordinated way. But you also have organizations like the BIS doing capacity building around the world and training on how to do climate risk assessment. So I think there's a lot of really positive, promising progress on that front. I also think that the transition to net zero is an absolutely phenomenal opportunity, not just a risk. So, you know, there's 2 trillion a year investment opportunity, and there's, you know, autonomous research and various other pieces saying that there's actually a substantial uplift in equities for those banks that are going to seize those opportunities. And how best to do that? I think actually joining organization like the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero and Net Zero and the Race to Zero, joining a really supportive peer group working out how to actually do the implementation of the transition to net zero, which is a fiendishly complex and business-wide task, as I'm sure my colleagues on the panel like Santander will agree with, because I know they're working furiously within the Net Zero Banking Alliance to do that now. And I think that will be a economy-wide transformation that's bigger than what we see non-digitalization. So take digitalization, that was a huge structural transformation of the economy, and indexes around the world are transformed, now dominated by digital tech giants, essentially, when 10 years ago they were nowhere to be seen. That's going to happen with climate change and the transition, and being at the leading edge of that is really important. And I think many of the people we've heard today are absolutely at the forefront, and it's great to see.
Thank you. Marta, it would be helpful for you to answer how is Santander ensuring resilience to the risks posed by climate change?
Thank you so much, Ellie. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, British Embassy of Madrid and Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the UK for organizing. So for Santander, as the rest of the banks, key is to understand the resilience of the companies we lend to in order to understand the resilience of our own portfolio to climate change. And what are the main steps we are taking there? As Alex just mentioned, first one I would highlight is we have set the ambition and we have a clear direction on where we want to go. We have the ambition to be net zero by 2050. We are a founding members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and we just in June released phase out strategies for thermal coal mining, thermal coal power, and also the first target for alignment of our power generation portfolio. So ambition is there. Second step, which I think it's also key, is we have a roadmap, of course, aligned with the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which makes things much easier, and also combining regulatory requirements. We have the main milestones we need to deliver in our commitments and in the regulator and supervisor scope, which is becoming intense in these recent years. And the third step is that we have agreed and are executing a 4-pillar strategy to fight climate change. The first pillar is portfolio alignment. And here we are aligning, as I mentioned already, the power generation portfolio and other portfolios will come. The second is supporting our customers in a low carbon economy. The third pillar is reducing our own environmental impact. And here we are carbon neutral in our own operations since 2020. And finally is embedding climate into risk management. So to execute this strategy and really assess resilience of our portfolios, what is proven to be key? First, collaboration. So climate is such a big thing that we need to collaborate, to learn from each other, to be involved in think tanks, in initiatives such as the Net Zero Banking Alliance and many others, UNEP5, Banking Environment Initiative, and collaborate, develop, learn. The second is to embed. So we need to cascade down this ambition to the entire organization and make sustainability be not on top of, but part of the business decisions. And the third one is count with reliable data. And here, let me do a final pledge. But we, the banking sector, we are a facilitator. And we cannot make informed decisions and we cannot disclose accurate information from our portfolios until we do not have accurate data from the companies we lend to. So I think here reliable data and comparable homogeneous data is really needed to help us progress in this state.
Thank you very much. And Angel, it would be very helpful to have your perspective from the Bank de España.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to explain our position as a central bank in this respect. We are absolutely involved in this process, and in fact, we have given important steps in this respect. And with respect to the specific question that we have in the panel, the first question, I think that the first step should be to have, as the previous speaker have said, to have a system of informational system that allow us to know where we are and how the things are evolving in the future. Because I think that it's very important to take into account the dynamic nature of this process, because probably all the agents are going to react to the decisions that we adopt, both the governments, the regulators, and the companies. And it's very important to take into account the improvements and the worsenings of the situation that happens as a consequence of the decision that we adopt. It's very important also that the informational system is homogeneous for everybody, because this is clearly a global factor, and we cannot allow to have free riders in this process. Something like carbon havens should be avoided at any cost. The second step is to develop the adequate analytical tools and methodologies in order to assess the potential impact of this risk, because as we know, we have not historical experience on this kind of process. So probably the tools should be prospective, for example, like a stress test, although we need to have in mind that at this moment, some of the physical risk and even transitional risk are starting to materialize. We are observing that for example, that the increase in the electricity prices that we are observing now, as in part, at least according to our analysis, in part as a reflection, a result of the increase in the CO2 emission rights. So I think that we can begin to use experience in order to analyze the potential impact that this could have. And the third step consists on incorporating those risks in the policy of the institutions. And this could imply, for example, to adjust the prices of the loans, of the financial products, in order to take into account this risk. In my view, this is very important in order to internalize, at least to some extent, the externality that pollution introduces in the economy, and also very important to identify the opportunities that are in the sector.
Thank you very much. Simon, please do offer your thoughts on the risks. And then just very quickly, I'm going to actually move on around the best practices around investing in green and driving green capital markets is the next question. So speakers, be prepared to think around that, a link to opportunities of green, I would say. But Simon, please focus on those risks and how companies are adjusting to them.
Thank you, Ellie. Good afternoon, everybody. So I think my fellow panelists and panelists in the first session covered many of the key areas. We talked about harmonization and coordination of policy and regulation, disclosure and reporting, improving access to and improving the consistency and comparability of data. Maria highlighted collaboration a couple of minutes ago as well. So let me focus on a different area, if I may, Ellie, and that is the capacity, the capability and the culture of financial institutions and the finance sector as a whole to support the COP26 private finance strategy, because this is a business-wide task in Alex's words. And I agree with him that it's bigger than the digital transformation. And let's remember, for many financial institutions, that's a transformation that is still ongoing. And I think bringing it to risk, without a culture of climate risk awareness throughout firms, indeed throughout financial services, then I'm afraid we'll see quite patchy identification and disclosure of climate risks, both within individual institutions and across finance as a whole. And there'll be particular issues in emerging markets where capacity and capability are particular constraints. So I think what we need to do globally then is to ensure that all finance professionals, both in the front line and in back office risk management roles, understand the cross-cutting transverse nature of climate risks. And I broaden that out to think about environmental and sustainability risks more widely. This can't be something anymore that just a specialist central climate risk team looks at. You know, the physical and transition risks of climate change impact on all risk types. Whatever climate action we take, we know the impacts of both physical and transition risks are going to increase in the years and decades to come, as I think it was Eduardo alluded to in his opening remarks a few moments ago. So a knowledge and understanding of climate risk, and I would argue broader risks, needs to become part of the skill set for every finance professional. We don't need everybody to become a climate risk specialist, but every finance professional should have an understanding of climate risk appropriate to their role, their function, and their organization. And of course, coming on to opportunities, that will help them spot opportunities in the transition to net zero for themselves and their clients too. So I think global alignment needs more than the harmonization of policy and regulation. It needs more than better data. It needs to be supported by ambitious action to build the capacity, the capability, and a climate-aware culture within financial institutions and across finance as a whole.
Thank you, Simon. I think that makes a really good point and links to what Marta was saying, that it needs this agenda needs to be part of not separate to the work that banks are doing. And actually, Marta, I want to come to you to start this first question around what are the current best practices around investing in green and driving green capital markets, but also how do we achieve the huge amount of investment that's needed to meet net zero? So what do you see? And because we are here with the UK and Spain link, and as Santander has key hubs in both, being a UK bank, but you being within the Spanish branch, be useful if you could draw out some examples from the UK and Spain and how we can drive and work together.
Thank you, Ellie. Of course. So as it is widely agreed, the transition to a low carbon economy is also a huge opportunity. The World Bank recent report measures the opportunity in 75 trillion euros between now and 2030. So that is really a lot. And at Banco Santander, how do we see this opportunity? We really want to play our parts to build a more sustainable and resilient world by financing what is green, but also helping greening the rest of the economy and supporting our customers in their transition. In financing what is green, main steps we have taken. We have a green finance target of 120 billion between now and 2030, and 2025, sorry, and 220 billion by 2030. And as of June, we have already mobilized 42 billion euros in green finance. Leveraging also on the recently published EU taxonomy, we have developed and are implementing a sustainable finance classification system. This is a tool that would allow us to identify green volumes that are being granted to our customers and also support the development of the green activity at Banco Santander. And the third step is that we have identified 5 main lines of opportunities where we really see we can make the difference supporting our customers. And those opportunities are mainly in the sectors of green buildings, renewables, clean mobility, agriculture, and circular economy. And giving you some examples, in renewables, we are leaders in project finance of renewables in Santander Corporate and Investment Banking, but we are also working to allow retail customers install solar panels by offering them specific products with discounts and trying to incentivize them to become more sustainable. In clean mobility, since 2019 across Europe, we have already granted more than 8 billion euros in credit for purchasing electric vehicles, or in green buildings in Spain, for example, the credit that we are giving to the real estate developer loans are more than 95% of our energy performance certificate of B and above, which qualifies as green. So we are really working on financing what is green, but on the other side, on supporting also our customers in the green transition. 2 main ideas here. First is the unique position we believe the financial sector has, given our capillarity, to reach the real economy. We have examples in Spain, for example, during the pandemic, where we collaborate by granting loans from the Instituto del Crédito Oficial, and we are able to reach 91% of the Spanish population. This is key for helping the countries such as Spain to transition and, for example, collaborating in disbursing the EU recovery funds, which will have also a climate component. And we really think we can be the partners of choice for our customers to help them and advise them in the transition. What is key here? It is key that the bankers, and it's where we are now, the main challenge ahead, the banker and the agents that deal with the customer need to start incorporating the transition in their daily communications with customers. This needs training. They really need to know the implications and so be able to advise the customers. And we also, of course, need more incentives for it to come. And I would like to mention a final comment, and it's about the just transition. It is also very important that banks are allowed to support customers and try not to leave anyone behind. So it is great, and of course we are to finance what is green, but we also need to be mindful of not leaving anyone behind in this transition. We need everyone to be on board to really achieve the climate goals.
Thank you. Alex, I want to come to you and also ask this, what you've seen as being kind of the best practice, and also around what businesses are doing within financial institutions can employ to assess companies' transitions as well. So I want also, if you can kind of come in around what you're looking at to ensure that there's kind of no greenwashing in these conversations. So yeah, over to you, Alex, to work out what the...
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the points Marta made about what we need is a financial system that is supporting real economy transition, and that includes financing the whole economy to transition and decarbonize. So yes, financing green is incredibly important, but we also need to work out how to get finance to those firms, to those households, to those companies that need to manage and finance their own transition to net zero. And that's very much the approach that both the Net Zero Banking Alliance takes, with sectoral targets. So the targets are set on a sectoral basis to ensure that there's actual real world decarbonisation rather than just moving your portfolio between sectors. And also very much the philosophy of GFANZ as an organisation, an alliance. And we've kicked off seven work streams to accelerate the transition to net zero, real world transition to net zero. And I'd say two of them are specifically on this point, like how can we best work with the real economy and corporates to facilitate and fund their own decarbonisation. So the first is on sectoral pathways. So some of you might be familiar with the Poseidon principles. So like building on that work that was done with the shipping industry to set out decarbonisation pathway, and doing that collaboratively with the real economy to set net zero pathways for different sectors. And then the other one, which is very relevant here, is setting out in a clear way expectations around what we as a financial community expect to see in corporate transition strategies, so we can better assess which companies are committed to transition and have really credible transition strategies. So to make that decision and that financing flows better and improve the data that we all agree, and we've agreed throughout this entire session, is needed. Finally, I will say that the other thing that we're trying to do in GFANZ is go beyond banks and asset owners and asset managers to build a net zero community within GFANZ to what we all know as financial sector actors are crucial to how financial decisions are made. So your indexes, your stock exchanges, your researchers, your data providers, those financial sector firms need to transition, as banks and asset managers and asset owners are doing, transition their core offering, their actual financial service provision to support the net zero transition. And that will unlock the data and the advice and the products and the services that are needed for financial firms and real economy firms to decarbonize.
Thank you. Angel, it would be very helpful for you to come in with what are the regulators doing? What are the central banks doing? Any insights from the NGFS as well on allowing for the incentives to go green, but also what are the best practices that you've seen?
Yeah, well, I think that the regulators are being very active in this respect. Basically, there are initiatives, important initiatives in terms of collection and dissemination of information that, as I said before, is the first step in all this process. And in the second place, they are trying to, let's say, to make the banks make conscious that the very important role that they should play in this process, because this process implies a reallocation, an important reallocation of resources and a renewal of capital stocks and things like that. And this costs for the society as a whole are be lower when less frictions are in the reallocation of resources, and one of the resources, crucial resource, is the financing. In this respect, we have issued supervisory expectation, and we are also developing a stress test. And the third and the final step should be the evaluation of the potential regulatory adjustments. All these elements are being developed at the global level, because it's very clear that the problem is a global problem. As I said before, we cannot allow these CO2 heavens, and all the regulations should be agreed at the global level. And in fact, both the NGFS is working on that, developing, for example, very important contribution, all the scenarios that we are going to use in order to have common stress tests for all the countries and for all the financial systems. The BCBS is also working in this subject. The FSB is also working in this area, and the idea is, of course, that we agree on the measures in order to be applied in an homogeneous way to all the countries, all the financial systems in the world. And with respect, probably the most important element, with respect to the potential regulatory measures, the complexity is very high. It's very high because some of what Simon said before, because the climate risks can be captured through the traditional risks, credit risk, market risk, liquidity risk, operational risk. But the problem is that they have very specific elements that make them different. The first one is the longer horizon. Well, perhaps 1 year or 2 years ago, we thought that the horizon was longer, but I think that the horizon is diminishing. But one of the elements is the horizon. And the second one is that we have no historical experience on the materialization of this kind of risks. And this is very important, but because most of the regulation now lies on models that are based, empirical models that are based on experience. We don't have any experience. So, for example, for this reason, are very important to have a stress test with this common methodology, common scenarios. And this is very important for the banks in order to incorporate those risks in the analysis. And in terms of the regulation of the regulatory potential regulatory measures, this is very open. In fact, the possibilities are, for example, not doing anything, changing all the regulation, or just using add-ons. And I think that in the next few months and quarters, we will see important initiatives in this respect.
Thank you very much. I'm aware that we are going to the ambassador in a couple of moments. And again, thank you very much for both the British Embassy in Madrid and the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the United Kingdom. So thank you very much. But before we do go to the ambassador, we'll run over by a few minutes. I've been told that Ambassador Elliott is being very generous in allowing us to, because it's such a key conversation that's very interesting. And I want to go to Simon. I want to ask you this same question. If you can kind of keep it quick to see what you think in the industry is the best, perhaps the most effective way that you've seen. I know that we're talking quite a lot on capacity building, which was very helpful, and also also I'm going to ask each of you to give me a quick fire. If there was one thing that could come out of COP26, what would that be that you would laud as like the key driver to be able to achieve net zero by 2050? So Simon, both of those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. Well, in terms of best practice, I think a couple of areas that I would have highlighted have been mentioned earlier, particularly the growth in sustainability-linked lending and bonds. We didn't mention the very welcome focus we're now seeing on transition finance, so supporting companies and communities moving to green rather than lending or investing to those companies and technologies that are green. But the great majority of lending isn't linked at the moment to sustainability targets, or isn't green at all. Only some 3% of total bond issuance, even in the broadest definition, could be described as green. Most financial institutions are not part of global alliances, such as GFANZ or the PRB, for instance. So the question is actually, how do we move from best practice to standard practice? Because that's what we're trying to do here, isn't it? If we're trying to align finance with sustainability, it's not about best practice, it's about this becoming standard practice. And the answer is set out, I think, in the COP26 private finance strategy. What needs to change is the culture within finance so that every professional financial decision takes account of climate change. That is the objective set out in the COP26 private finance strategy. And for that to take place, it follows that every finance professional needs to have an understanding and awareness of these kinds of issues, so that every finance professional is thinking about this all of the time in every conversation with customers and clients, when developing new products and services, when thinking about risk, and so on. So to align financial capital with sustainability and move from best practice to standard practice, we also need, or perhaps even first need, to align human capital with sustainability too. And I don't think that's getting enough attention. So one thing I'd like to see in terms of green finance at COP26 then is for us to be as collectively ambitious in terms of building the capacity and capability of finance and professional services to support the transition, as we are in setting the decarbonisation targets themselves. Otherwise, we're not going to meet them.
I really like that moving best practice to standard practice line. So fully agree there. I think that's the ambition. Once we actually stop having these conversations, and that green finance is just part of everything we do, or we have them in a different way, I think that will be achieved.
Absolutely,
so, Alex,
absolutely. I mean, people who talk about green finance like me should be made redundant, because we should be talking about finance, not green finance.
Great. So hopefully in 2050 you'll be able to retire there, Simon.
If I haven't retired by 2050, something has gone badly wrong.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. So Alex, the one thing to come out of COP, we're going to keep it quick because I do really want to go to the ambassador.
Well, the highest level goal is to keep 1.5 degrees alive of COP26, and that's going to need increased ambition from governments, frankly, better NDCs and the like, because if we don't keep 1.5 degrees alive, we're in trouble as a planet. So
there we go. Thank you.
That's a top level goal. One of the four priorities of that is finance, and that's why Mark Carney's leading Private Finance Hub. And I think Simon just channeled Mark Carney in everything he said. The outcome needs to be that every professional every professional financial decision takes climate into account, and that's not ESG. That's mainstreaming everything we're doing, and that's what GFANZ is about, bringing together not just banks but asset managers, asset owners, insurers, stock exchanges, credit rating agencies, and the like, to all work together to ensure that every professional financial decision takes climate into account.
I'm being very, very generous, liberal with my time, but Marta, very quickly.
Thank you. Very quick. I would highlight 3 messages from a financial entity point of view. First, clear direction. Governments should set clear pathways, especially for the most concerning sectors, how they are going to reach the low carbon economy, and this will add certainty. Second, adequate incentives. So companies need to have incentives to transition, and the financial sector needs to have incentives to support the transition. And this will help in speed achieving the goals. And third, global homogeneity in regulation and data. If not, decisions cannot be made accurate. So this will be key to ensure a level playing field and to reach transparency in the market.
Thank you. Angel, what do you see at COP26?
Yeah, in my view, the 2 elements that are more important in this respect are very similar to the ones that were raised by my predecessor, José María Roldán, related to the we need to show an unit front in this respect at the world level. And in this respect, I think that it's more important to have an agreement than other considerations. Because as I said before, I think it's very important to show the world that there is no free riding in this respect. And the second very important element in my respect is to take into account that most of the measures, the most powerful measures that we can implement in order to facilitate the transition are not in the hands of the financial sector or the central banks or the regulators, probably are the governments, but it's very important to take into account that some of these measures can have important effects in inequality. And it's, in my view, it's very important not to leave behind anybody, because we need the social support in order to achieve those targets. We cannot repeat the, let's say, mistakes that we had, for example, with globalization.
Thank you very much. And thank you all. I think we could have a whole other session on ensuring equality across sustainability and transition to net zero, but we won't. Don't worry, Ambassador. We are closing now. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you everyone for listening. And I think it's been an enlightening conversation that has sparked more conversation. So again, thank you very much to the Embassy in Spain and to the Chamber of Commerce. So thank you. And I now hand over to Ambassador Hugh Elliott, who is the British Ambassador to Spain and Andorra. And thank you on behalf of OMFIF as well. It's been a delight to work with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellie, and thank you to everybody. And an incredibly rich discussion, which I have listened to throughout. And my brain hurts, I'm afraid, right now, as I try to digest it all and think of an appropriate way of wrapping up. So what I think I'll do, first of all, I'll start by saying thank you. So thank you very much to everybody who's participated. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Danae. Thank you, OMFIF, for helping. You've been great partners through all of this. Thanks, of course, to Gonzalo, to Emma, to the Lord Mayor, to everybody who's made this such a rich and interesting discussion. Of course, Eduardo, Spanish Chamber, we've got a fantastic relationship. Might come back to something. So I would just, I think, probably share a few quick personal reflections on some of the things that I said. I used to work in communications, and so I like strap lines. And I think the best strap line I got from all of this is not really a strap line, but it was what Jose Maria said in one of your extremely interesting comments, Jose Maria, which was, this is complicated, and it is very complicated. I think you were referring particularly to international collaboration, which you have all identified as being absolutely central. Marta just mentioned that in terms of global homogeneity of regulation, obviously an extraordinarily complicated thing to achieve, but something that we are definitely fully working on as governments around the world. So how do you make sense of this complexity? The next strapline I thought was another one from Jose Maria, which was the apostles to plumbers, a strapline, which I thought summarizes quite a lot. I think it's great that if we don't need apostles anymore, they go into the background, and there's less preaching and more wiring being like affects my professions. So I think it is very, very good if we're actually moving to those discussions and the encouragement to get public and private in the room to make those very real, practical sort of discussions. I think is really important. And looking to the complexity, we just need to make a lot more of this happen a lot more of the time. That's really important. I was struck by the mention which you mentioned in passing when we were looking at what's happening in Spain right now in electricity prices, at the question of public acceptability, and I do think this is an underplayed aspect of the debate at the moment, which is to be able to look ahead at what we think the actual public and citizens feel from what they see around what's happening and how we keep the public acceptability on board throughout all of this. It's very well to say we would like to have green everything, but when green everything starts to money, green everything becomes slightly less attractive. I think that is a risk which is slightly underplayed, and it would be good in this area to look at a bit more. The question of moving from, and I think Simon, this was your comment, from best practice to standard practice. I completely and very strongly agree with that, and it's something that, sort of having worked on sustainability agendas in private and public sectors, I feel about quite strongly. I personally hate the term environmental and social governance, and to nick your idea and transfer it, Simon, I would say, why is the SD not just G? That would be my strapline on a lot of this. And then really to say, just by way of closing, that of course, from the position of the UK government, I'm not going to give you a spiel about the UK government's position and the initiatives. You've heard a lot about a lot of different initiatives throughout, and an aspect of the UK government and other UK actors' ambitions throughout this discussion. Just to say that it is great that there is a massive political consensus around many of the principles in the UK. And I should say, by the way, that there's been an interesting discussion for another reason, which is because my boss has changed during the course of the discussion, because there has been a cabinet reshuffle going on in the United Kingdom, and the Foreign Secretary is now Liz Truss, who I'm very pleased to say is, like her predecessor, a strong advocate of rapid climate action, and one who understands the implications for the private sector, the importance of private public, which is great news. The fact that we're facilitators here really as the embassy. Because it is such an important issue for our two countries, I think the relationship between the UK and Spain is, to take another strap line from the quote, thank you very much, Eduardo, the best since Wellington. There were scratchy times around Wellington's time, so I think it may be even better. But I'll take the best of Wellington, and that does mean we're in a reasonably good place to facilitate some of these kinds of discussions. Appreciate very much the synergies, the investment link, the Rami, and it just made perfect sense for us, and we absolutely will. It's a core part of what we're up to as an embassy, as a diplomatic network around the world. It will continue to be that. COP26 coming on the back of COP25, as you all know, obviously strengthens that link, but it's not just about a climate summit, because we need to be turning our minds to after COP26 and how we continue to keep the momentum going once we have banked a lot of the successes that I hope we will manage to bank in COP26. And it is being a massive international effort. You've talked about, I think somebody mentioned there were 32 working days to go, and somebody else mentioned there were sort of 50 calendar days. I haven't been counting myself, but I suspect there's no actual difference between calendar days and working days for many of those people working on COP26. And I take my hat off to them. And I just wanted to finish up by saying that the role of green finance in all of this, the more I participate in these events and the more I learn about it, the more central it is. And so I am very grateful to all of you for giving your time to this debate, and for doing all that you are doing to help make what we are talking about stand practice. Thank you.